The bass throbbed violently through the concrete walls of Vesper, the most renowned nightclub in Boston, as I threaded my way through the crowd toward the bar. My feet ached in the pair of borrowed high heels. The forced smile on my face had faded more than an hour earlier, and a slow, creeping regret settled in as I wondered why I had ever let Madison, my co-worker and closest friend, drag me out of the house tonight. "Claire, you cannot spend your whole life with nothing but your laptop and your chubby cat," she had said. "Friday nights are for living, not for scrolling through Pinterest and rewatching old movies." I, however, was convinced that Oliver, my fussy gray cat, was still far better company than most of the people pressed against me in this chaotic sea of bodies. Someone brushed past so closely their cocktail nearly splashed across the hem of my dress. The thick perfume mingled with the bite of expensive liquor, layered with something that smelled a little like desperation. I pulled myself in, trying to slip through clusters of people who had no concept of personal space. After a brief struggle, I finally made it to the bar, squeezing between two groups, chattering as though this place belonged to them alone. The bartender was a woman with purple hair, 3 nose rings, and a dragon tattoo coiled around her left arm. She caught my eye. "Vodka soda," I shouted over the music. "Make it strong, please." If I had any hope of surviving tonight, I would need at least one drink heavy enough to dull the pounding in my temples and soften the sensation of bodies pushing too close. While waiting, I glanced around, my eyes unconsciously searching for Madison, who had vanished less than 20 minutes after dragging me inside. There was no sign of her. My phone buzzed in my bag, 3 messages from her, all variations of, "I am having so much fun, you just enjoy yourself. Perfect." The one person I knew in this overcrowded box had officially abandoned me, which meant that after this drink, I had every right to slip away, crawl back under my blankets, open my laptop, and return to my quiet, introverted life. But then a voice leaned in close to my ear, far too close, his breath warm and tinged with wine, sending a shiver down my spine. "All alone, beautiful." My heart tightened, not because of the words, but because of that tone, the familiar cadence of drunken men who believed a few drinks granted them the right to touch whoever they pleased. I did not turn, keeping my voice clear and firm. "Not interested. Come on, do not be like that," he said again, and then his hand landed on my hip, real, deliberate, claiming. In an instant, I spun around, my fingers already clamped around his wrist, pulling it away from my body. I was ready to confront a middle-aged drunk with a sloppy smile. But the man I had just touched looked nothing like what I expected, and he was not alone. Another hand, larger, stronger, brushed lightly against my waist from behind. Instinct rushed through me, sharp and cold. Something was wrong. The air shifted, and the moment I turned fully, everything in me seemed to freeze. The man standing before me was tall, broad-shouldered, his face striking enough to belong on the cover of a magazine, though the kind that featured men who were not only mesmerizing but dangerously so. His eyes were dark, unblinking, studying me as though he could see straight into the quietest corners of my mind. Along his cheek, a faint red mark was beginning to bloom my slap. He lifted his hand to touch it, slowly, with a calmness that chilled me. Then his mouth curved, part smile, part warning. "Do it again," he said, his voice low and warm, soft enough that I had to lean in to catch it. "I dare you. If you are still listening at this moment, thank you for staying with us through every beat of emotion woven into this story. If you have ever found yourself accidentally stepping into a strange situation like Claire, or if you simply love stories with a little tremor, a little mystery, and a whole lot of feeling, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share this video so we can continue spreading these intriguing fragments of life even farther. Where are you listening from? Leave a comment with the name of your city or state so we can see just how far this story has traveled across this vast map. And do not go anywhere, because right after this, Claire is about to discover something she never saw coming. I left the bar with my vodka soda in hand, my mind still slightly unsettled after that strange encounter with Nick Romano. Even as I tried to walk quickly, I could feel the heat rising along the back of my neck, the distinct sensation that his eyes were still following every movement I made, as if some invisible thread were tugging me gently but insistently back toward him. I slipped through the mass of people dancing beneath the relentless flash of strobe lights, the mix of sweat, perfume, and alcohol swirling together in a way that made my head swim. Madison still had not answered my messages. I let out a quiet sigh and searched for a quieter corner, somewhere, anywhere that did not require me to be bumped into every 3 seconds. As I reached the lounge area in the back, where low sofas sat in the dim, hazy light, a man staggered across my path. His eyes were bloodshot, his mouth mumbling something incoherent. The drink in his hand was nearly gone, sloshing dangerously with each unsteady step. I moved to the side to avoid him, but he suddenly turned, blocking my way. "Well now, who might you be?" he drawled, the heavy smell of liquor rolling off him. "Come with me for a bit, beautiful." I refused to react, shifting to the left to pass, but he moved with me. He lifted his hand, reaching to touch my shoulder. I already said I am not interested. My voice was firm, my eyes cold, but he did not listen. He only chuckled and stepped closer. I backed away, feeling the cool surface of the glass wall nearly against my spine. His breath, thick with alcohol, washed over my face, and before he could do anything more, another hand appeared, gripping his arm. I think she made herself clear. The low voice behind me was unmistakable. Nick Romano. The man blinked, his unfocused gaze shifting toward the source of the words. Who asked you?" He slurred, trying to yank his arm free, but failing entirely. Nick did not need strength. He only tightened his grip slightly, and the man yelped, stumbling backward, his expression twisting from arrogance to fear in a matter of seconds. Under the dim lights, I saw the change clearly. He stared at Nick with something like shock, then suddenly seemed to realize something. I did not know. Sorry. I did not know. It was you." He turned and fled, almost running, his glass falling to the floor and shattering. No one in the crowd noticed. Nick turned toward me, his expression calm, as though the entire moment had been nothing more than a passing breeze. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though in truth my heart was pounding so hard it felt like a drum. I hated admitting that his presence made me feel safe, that I was grateful I had not needed to face that man alone. "Do you always show up at the perfect moment like that?" I asked, half teasing, half sincere. "Only when it is necessary," Nick replied, his eyes catching the faint blue glow reflecting from the ceiling. "And I thought you needed it." I did not answer. I felt both rescued and suddenly entangled in something far less clear. Instinct whispered that this man was not ordinary. The way that drunk man's attitude had shifted the instant he heard Nick's voice. The way he had looked terrified enough to run, without looking back, none of that was normal. Nick Romano was not just an attractive man in a flawless suit. He was the kind of man other men feared, and the unsettling part was that I did not fear him. Instead, I felt myself drawn in, little by little, as though every word he spoke, every glance he gave me, was a puzzle I could not help but want to solve. "Claire," Nick said softly, yet with unmistakable intent, "if I asked you to have dinner with me, what would you think?" I looked at him then. Really looked. In his eyes there was no pressure, no game, only an odd, focused interest, as though he had chosen me out of a room full of women far more polished, far more dazzling. "I would think," I said, lifting my drink, "that I am stepping into unfamiliar territory, but—" I met his gaze and caught a flicker of something like anticipation. "I also think I have been boring enough lately to need a little push." Nick smiled. And I knew then that the slap had not ended anything. It had only just begun. I did not know why I was still standing there, my hand still holding my drink without taking a sip, my eyes still following the faint, unreadable smile on Nick Romano's lips as if he were holding the key to a doorway I was not ready to walk through. Everything about this man made me feel that nothing about him was ordinary, too calm, too controlled, too dangerous, yet far too captivating. I had assumed I would scoff, decline, and walk away the way I always did whenever a man in a bar tried to charm me. But instead, I heard myself asking, in a voice so low it was almost a breath, "Why me?" Nick lifted his glass, his gaze never leaving mine, taking a slow sip as if he had the entire night to consider his answer. "Because you do not know who I am, and you slapped me without blinking." He set his glass on the low table beside the leather chair, then leaned in slightly, close enough that I could catch the scent of expensive cologne, blended with something like gunpowder, not a real smell, but an impression. "Claire Bennett, I meet enough people every day. People who want to impress me, people who want access, people who want something. But you are the first in many years who touched me as if I were just a man. I let out a small laugh, part discomfort, part caution. And you find that attractive? I find it true. There was no trace of humor in his voice, and I do not get many chances to touch the truth. His words made me pause. There was something in his eyes, deep, somber, dark as an abyss, that slowed my heartbeat for a moment. I should not be here. I knew that. This was not a simple encounter. It was an invitation wrapped in courtesy. I am not the kind of person who accepts invitations from men I have just slapped across the face, I said lightly. Then consider me an exception, Nick replied, one corner of his mouth lifting. Dinner. No strings. No promises. You choose the time. I choose the place. I meant to refuse. I had opened my mouth to say the words. But then behind him, I noticed two men in dark suits, their eyes unblinking, standing like statues. One of them murmured something into an earpiece, and the other immediately stepped away, heading toward the back exit of the club. A chill crept down my spine. Who are you? I asked, this time without a trace of teasing. I am someone you should not be too curious about too soon, he said, his eyes softening. Because if you become too curious, you will not be able to go back to being ordinary. So, this is a warning? I asked, raising a brow. This is an opportunity, Nick corrected, his voice dropping into something like a muted undertow. A chance to see a part of the world most people only hear about on the news or in television dramas. A chance to step into a place where small decisions can change an entire life. I did not know whether it was his words, the way he looked at me, or the soft blur of the second vodka soda beginning to settle in. But heat rose along my neck, and my heartbeat slowed. I was not sure I understood everything, but I understood one thing. If I said yes, I would never be the same Claire Bennett again. Nick watched me as if reading every passing thought. He leaned in just slightly, whispering in a way only I could hear through the rolling waves of music. If you are afraid, you should leave, right now. Walk out of Vesper, call a car, and forget this night. I will not bother you. I stayed silent. But if you feel even the slightest pull... He tapped his glass gently against mine, his eyes locking onto me. Then call me. My number is on the back of the card. He stood. In the flickering light of the nightclub, his silhouette seemed carved out of shadow and intention. He walked away slowly, each step purposeful, the remaining bodyguard following behind without a word. No one said anything else. I remained there, alone, in the tide of sound, light, and the breath of strangers. The drink in my hand was still unfinished, and in my purse lay a small piece of paper, holding nothing but a name and a phone number. I knew that if I called, everything would change. But I also knew that perhaps I had already stopped being the person I was before stepping into Vesper tonight. I left Vesper when the clock was nearing 11, earlier than any Friday night out I had ever had, yet I carried with me a strange, restless turmoil. Stepping out of the flashing lights, the smell of alcohol, and the frantic pulse of music into the cold October air of Boston felt as if I were surfacing from a dream or from the beginning of a temptation that might one day become an addiction. The business card stayed in my palm the entire walk home. I did not know why I had not tucked it into my wallet. Perhaps I wanted the physical reminder of something that felt too unreal to be trusted. A small black card, thick and smooth, embossed with a single line of silver letters, Nick Romano. On the back, a string of numbers. No title, no company, no address. I curled up on my sofa, legs drawn beneath me, Oliver nestled at my side, the living room light dimmed to a soft glow, and my phone resting in front of me as if daring me to make a choice. I had told myself at least twice that I would throw the card into the trash and let the entire evening fade like any other fleeting encounter. But then, with a reflex I did not fully control, my fingers dialed the number. I did not save it first. I did not think. I simply called, as if to see what would happen. The phone rang exactly 3 times before it was answered. Claire. He knew. He did not need me to introduce myself. Did not ask, "Who's this?" like any other unfamiliar call. He knew. "You figured that out quickly," I said, trying to steady my voice, though my palms were damp with sweat. "I hoped I was not guessing wrong," Nick replied, that same low, even tone. but this time it sounded closer, as though he were sitting in the next room. I just wanted to know if that offer was still on the table. It is. I am not sure I am ready. Then do not call it a date. Call it dinner between two people who had a strange moment in a nightclub. I let out a short, genuine laugh. Right now? If you have not eaten, there is a place I want to take you. Not far, not loud, and no one touches anyone unless they are invited. I hesitated. The clock had slipped past 11:30. I need 10 minutes to change. I will send a car in 12. The call ended before I could say anything else. I stood, my heartbeat heavier than normal, not from fear, but from the sense that I was about to step into something undefined. I did not choose a cocktail dress or anything too formal. Just dark jeans, a white button-down shirt, a dove gray trench coat. Simple enough not to send the wrong message, polished enough not to feel out of place beside a man like him. The black car was waiting outside my building, as if it had been there long before I descended the steps. The driver stepped out and opened the door without asking my name. Inside, the scent of new leather and a faint trace of cologne lingered. As I settled into the seat, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Do not worry, I do not plan to eat you. Unless you order it first. I laughed. For the first time that night, I did not feel like someone who had been swept away, but someone choosing where to step next. I looked out the window. Boston's late-night streets were quiet now, lit by the glow of street lamps reflecting against the damp pavement. And I was on my way to meet a man unlike anyone I had ever known, a man who might be a mistake, or a turning point. The car stopped on a quiet corner of the North End, the old Italian neighborhood with its cobblestone streets, and the warm, rising scent of bread drifting through the late-night air. Before I could ask, the door opened, and there was Nick Romano, leaning casually against a lamppost as if he were part of the city itself, as if he had always been standing there, waiting for me. He was not wearing a suit. A dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dark trousers, softly polished leather shoes. The same presence, but without the distance he carried at Vesper. This version of Nick felt closer, more real, and somehow more dangerous because of it. I did not know the Mafia also had dinner in places with red striped tablecloths, I said, half teasing, half testing, when I noticed the small Italian restaurant sign glowing warmly behind him. Nick raised an eyebrow, a faint smile touching his mouth. I have not confessed, and I have not been convicted. He held the door for me. He did not push it wide, did not make a show of anything. Every gesture was so quiet and deliberate that stepping inside felt like crossing into another world. Only a few tables were still occupied. An older couple whispered to each other in the corner, and the waiter nodded with a familiar smile the moment he saw Nick. There were no menus, no introductions. We were guided to a table near the window, where the streetlight spilled a soft reflection across the dark wooden surface. You come here often? I asked once we were seated. Nick poured water from a glass carafe, moving with an ease that suggested everything around him answered to his rhythm. The owner once owed my father a large debt. Instead of paying in cash, he cooks me dinner once a week. I paused for a moment, struck by the way he said it, as if debts and meals naturally belonged in the same sentence. And suddenly I remembered I had not eaten since noon. And you? Nick asked, his eyes fixed on mine as if nothing I said could hide itself. Freelancer. Writing, editing content, sometimes translation. A job you can do at home, in pajamas, with a cat, and too much coffee. I like coffee, he said. And cats? I have not had the chance. But I know how not to make them hate me. The waiter brought out 2 plates of warm bruschetta, followed by handmade pasta, the scent of garlic and cheese rising so richly that I realized how hungry I truly was. I thought you might choose someplace fancier, I said, with live music and a 10-year-old bottle of wine. I wanted to see whether you can eat spaghetti without getting sauce on your shirt. Or if you do, whether you can laugh about it. And you? I asked. Do you test people with Italian food? I have dinner only with people who make me curious. I slowed for a beat. Nick's gaze was always like that, not intrusive, but deep enough to make the other person feel seen in ways they were not used to. And if I said I do not like people being curious about me, then I would promise not to ask too much, if you promise not to leave halfway through. I let out a small laugh, not because his words were funny, but because I found myself having dinner with a man every instinct told me to be wary of, and every piece of rational thought urged me to understand. He did not talk too much. He did not boast. He did not try to impress. He simply ate slowly, asked just enough, and listened as if the small, ordinary details I shared mattered. Dinner moved in that strange space between comfort and tension. I realized I did not feel pressured, but I also never forgot that I was sitting across from a man unlike anyone else. When I finished the last sip of sparkling water and set the cloth napkin down, Nick placed his fork and knife neatly on the plate and tilted his head. "Thank you for not running." "I did not say I would not," I replied, though a part of me knew I had chosen to stay from the moment I stepped out of the car tonight. Nick lifted his glass, looking at me through the clear rim. "We can start with dessert, or we can start something new. Your choice." And I do not know if it was the lighting, the food, or the way he always phrased things with two open doors, but I answered softly, surprising even myself. "Dessert first," Nick ordered. Strawberry panna cotta and espresso for both of us, while I was not entirely sure I still had room for anything after that plate of sauce-drenched pasta. But when the dessert arrived, I could not resist its soft, sweet fragrance. We sat in silence for a few minutes, neither of us eager to break the gentle, unfamiliar quiet that had settled between us. Outside the window, the streetlight glimmered on the slick cobblestones still damp from an unexpected light rain, and the traffic had thinned into almost nothing, leaving the old neighborhood wrapped in a late-night stillness. Nick set his spoon down and leaned back slightly. "Someone once told me I do not know how to eat dessert," he said quietly, his voice deeper than usual. "She hated panna cotta, always said it was mushy and pointless." I smiled but did not interrupt. The way he spoke told me this was not an ordinary story. "I was once engaged," he continued, his eyes drifting past the glass, toward something distant and unreachable. "Her name was Liana. We met when we were young. She did not know who I was. She did not care about the Romano name, did not fear my father, did not fear the world I belonged to. She saw me as just a quiet, slightly strange guy who knew how to fix cars and was not terrible in the kitchen." I stayed silent, listening to each word as if any sudden movement might shatter the delicate memory he was touching. I used to think, if anyone could pull me out of everything I grew up with, it would be Liana. Nick paused, his finger tapping lightly against the espresso cup as though holding on to an old breath. "She died in a car accident. On her way home after an argument with me." He stopped. I could feel the undercurrent rising beneath that calm exterior. I did not pick up when she called. My chest tightened, as though I myself had stepped into a loss I had not been warned about. "It was not entirely your fault," I said softly, but Nick only let out a faint, resigned laugh, the kind that belonged to someone far too accustomed to taking the blame, if only to keep the rest of the world intact. "We were supposed to marry that fall. The church was booked, the rings were finished, and I never got to tell her I was sorry." I set my spoon down, the warmth of the wooden table pressing softly against my palms. Without quite knowing why, I reached out and touched the back of his hand. Just a light touch, but enough to make his gaze settle on me. "I do not think someone like you tells these things to just anyone." "I do not," Nick admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "And I do not know why I am telling you. Maybe," I said, still looking at him, "because I do not really know why I am sitting here either." He looked at me for a long moment, saying nothing, only exhaling quietly before leaning in, not close enough to make me pull away, but close enough that I felt a delicate, invisible thread stretched between us. "Thank you for listening," he said. "Not everyone has the patience to hear about the dead. Not everyone has the courage to keep them alive in memory," I replied. Outside, a breeze skimmed through the branches. Inside, surrounded by the scent of coffee and sweet cream, I felt something in Nick Romano crack just slightly. A small fracture, just big enough for a trace of light to slip through, and I was not certain whether I should follow it deeper. But tonight, I knew I had stepped into a place no one in his world was ever allowed to touch, and he had let me. We left the restaurant when the clock was nearing midnight, the Boston night breeze slipping through the cobblestone streets of the North End, carrying with it a faint saltiness from the distant harbor and the fading echo of tires somewhere down the block. I could not recall exactly what I said on the way to the car, only the sensation of Nick's hand resting lightly behind my back, not touching me, but close enough for me to feel the warmth of him. Everything felt unusually quiet. not because the world lacked sound, but because my mind was caught between two clashing currents, a strange, disarming sense of safety and a nameless fear swelling slowly in my chest. When the black car stopped in front of my apartment building, I turned to him, intending to offer some polite, final sentence to close the night, but his eyes were already on me, as if he knew what I was about to say, and also knew I would not say it. "Thank you for not turning this into an interrogation," I blurted. "I like hearing how you see things," Nick replied, his voice low like the night wind. "You observe the world as if it still has the possibility to change. And you do not? I am not sure I still believe the world can be better, but I believe someone like you could make me want to look again." I let out a short, quiet laugh, because if I let it last any longer, I feared too much of myself would show. My hand rested on the door handle, though I did not open it yet. "I think I should go in. Thank you for dinner, Claire." He said my name without urgency, without pressure, but with a tone that made it impossible to turn away without answering. I looked back. "I am not a good man," Nick said, his voice slow and deliberate, each word sounding like a final warning. "I know," I replied, and it was only then that I realized I was not lying. I knew, without question, that this was not a man who brought stability or years of quiet peace. Yet at that same moment, I felt something unmistakable. A part of me no longer wanted peace. "Good," he murmured, "because I am not ready to hurt someone kind." I nodded, stepped out of the car, my hand trembling slightly from the cold, or perhaps from something else entirely. I did not look back until I stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, I saw him still sitting in the car, unmoving, like a figure pulled from an old story I had accidentally flipped open. My apartment felt unusually quiet. Oliver jumped onto the sofa, pressed his head against my leg, then settled beside me as if he too were trying to understand what had just unfolded. I changed clothes, washed my face, but I could not shake what Nick had left behind. Not the feeling of a successful date, but the feeling of having walked too close to an edge, unsure whether to step back or lean forward. Lying in bed, my phone resting on my chest, the glow from the screen casting a pale reflection on the ceiling, I saw a message arrive at 12:23, from an unsaved number, though I knew exactly who it was. "If you cannot sleep, look outside." I sat up, stepped out onto the balcony. The car was still there under the soft streetlight, the rear window lowered just a fraction. Nick looked up, not smiling, not waving, just watching in the same quiet way he had all night, and somehow, I felt as though I had been steadied in the middle of someone else's fractured heartbeat. And in that moment, I did not simply see who Nick Romano was, I began to understand what truly frightened me. It was not the fear that he might hurt me. It was the fear that if I let him in, I would no longer be myself. And the most terrifying part was that I was not sure I wanted to go back to who I had been. The next morning began with sunlight slipping through the window blinds, brushing softly against my eyelids like a quiet reminder that last night's dream or last night's impulse had been real. I had gone to dinner with a man who could silence an entire bar with nothing more than a glance. And I had stood on my balcony watching him, fully aware that I was stepping deeper into something unnamed, unshaped, and undoubtedly unsafe. Oliver jumped onto my desk, his tail sweeping across the surface as I made coffee and tried to pull myself back into reality. I opened my laptop and checked emails out of habit. One article request from a regular client, 2 revision notes, and a strange message from an address I had never seen. A single line, no subject, no signature. "Be careful with what you do not understand." I froze for a moment. My heart struck harder once, a single heavy beat. There were no attachments, no links, no obvious signs of anything threatening, but the message carried a chill that slid straight down my spine. I was about to delete it, dismissing it as spam, when my phone rang, an unknown number. I usually let calls like that go unanswered, but this time, some vague instinct made me pick up. Claire Bennett. A woman's voice came through, low, cold, and sharply clear. Not the coldness of someone without emotion, but the coldness of someone accustomed to giving orders and never repeating them. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am the one person who will warn you once, and only once." She paused, as if to make sure I was truly listening. "Stay away from Nick Romano." I let out a small laugh, the reflex of someone refusing to reveal fear. I do not know who you are, but I think you are involving yourself in something that is none of your business. You do not know me, but you should, she replied. I am Elena Volkov. I nearly dropped the phone. The name was not unfamiliar. I had heard it in vague news articles, in finance reports about companies with suspected laundering ties, in unsolved disappearances whispered through the media. Volkov was not just a family, it was a dynasty of power stretching from the east, rooted in Russia but reaching through Europe and into the United States. I steadied my breath. Are you threatening me? No. I am offering you a chance. We do not want any more unintended casualties. Nick Romano is not what you think. And affection is not something he can sustain without someone paying for it. If you are so concerned, I said, half defiant, half defensive, why not speak to him directly? I do not need to. He knows exactly what I think. But you do not. You are playing a game without understanding the rules, and that is how people die faster. Elena's voice softened, but not in a way that eased the edge. I was you, 10 years ago, naive, curious, thinking I was special, believing someone like Nick could choose a different life because of me. I swallowed, my palms damp, and then I learned that in their world, every closeness is a crack, and every crack is a doorway for blood. There was a brief silence on the line. Do not wait for someone's death to wake you. The call ended before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone, the unknown number vanishing as if it had never existed. In the gentle morning light, with the scent of coffee still lingering in the air, a coldness began to coil along my spine. I did not know who Elena was to Nick, did not know what had happened between them, or how she already knew about me after only one night. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The world I was stepping into had begun to look back at me. And for the first time, I was not sure I still had enough time to step away. I sat frozen on the chair near the balcony, my phone resting in my lap, the screen dark but still burning hot between my hands. Elena Volkov. Her name had not left my mind since the call ended. Every word she spoke repeated itself inside my head like a cold refrain, carrying something heavier than a warning, something closer to a prophecy. I could not decide what frightened me more, the sudden clarity of an underworld I had only ever known through movies and rumors, or the fact that I had slipped too deep in only a matter of days. I had planned to say nothing, to keep quiet, and find my own way out. But just as I was typing a message to Nick, only one short sentence, "We should stop," the doorbell rang. I flinched, startled by how sharply fear could rise at a simple sound. Through the peephole I saw him, Nick, stood there, not rushed, not agitated. Yet when I opened the door, his eyes met mine with the certainty of someone who already knew. "She called you, didn't she?" His voice was low and steady, stripped of any attempt at pretense. I nodded. I did not intend to close the door, but I did not invite him in either. Nick stepped inside as I moved aside, not asking, not waiting. He glanced around my apartment as if wanting to confirm no one else was listening. "Elena does not say things for effect," I whispered when he turned back to me. "And I do not think she called just to chat." Nick exhaled, running a hand through his hair as though trying to contain something fierce beneath the surface. "I knew this would come sooner than I wanted, but I hoped I had more time to prepare you. Elena is part of my past, a part I could never fully control. She said she used to be me," I said quietly. "Said she thought she was special, thought you could change, and then she nearly died." Nick did not deny it. He stepped closer, each movement slow, then stopped, leaving just enough space between us for me to step back if I chose to. "I will not lie to you," he began, his eyes locked on mine. "My life is not simple. What you have seen so far is only the surface. Behind it is something most people would run from the moment they feel it, and yet you pulled me in." "I did not pull you," Nick said, his voice tightening with something like pain. "You walked in. On your own. And I hoped you were strong enough to stay." A soft, exhausted laugh escaped me, rising with the frustration in my throat. "You hoped? Nick, this is not a game. I am not a piece on your board. No, you are not." He stepped closer, this time nearer than before. "You are the one thing that makes me want to change the rules." I backed up half a step, then stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs, my throat tightening under the weight of something unfamiliar and overwhelming. I wanted to shout that I could not live in a world where people knew my name before I knew theirs. where a midnight phone call might carry real danger. But instead, I heard myself whisper, "Then what do you want me to do?" Nick's gaze softened. He extended his hand. He did not touch me, simply offered it, open, steady, a quiet invitation. "Stay. Give me time. Give us a chance. I will not let anyone touch you. Not Elena, not anyone." I did not answer right away. Between the distant sounds of cars on the street below and the relentless beat of my own heart, I stood there looking at his hand, wondering why, despite everything I knew, despite the danger wrapping closer around me, I still could not turn away. Maybe it was because, for the first time in my life, I felt truly alive, truly afraid, truly in love. And in that fear, there was a sliver of hope, fragile, trembling, but real enough that I did not close the door. I do not remember the exact moment that made me decide to close the door behind Nick instead of closing it to send him away. All I know is that when I turned back inside, he was already standing in the middle of my small living room, the warm yellow light falling over the straight line of his nose and his quiet, shadowed eyes, as if this apartment had never belonged to anyone before him. Oliver walked out from the bedroom, moved slowly toward him, and looked up as though assessing him. I held my breath, waiting for a reaction. But then, unexpectedly, my cat rubbed his head against Nick's leg, circled once, and sat down. "You just passed the most important test," I said, relaxing for the first time since that call. Nick leaned down and gently ran a hand along Oliver's back as if he had done it all his life. "I think he is smarter than most people." We sat on the sofa with 2 cups of hot tea on the table between us. Not wine, not strong cocktails, just tea bags and boiled water from my electric kettle. Something so simple it softened every layer of defense I had been holding. Nick sat upright but not tense. He did not talk much. Every now and then he nodded as I told him about the dull parts of freelance work, about clients who sent emails at 2 a.m. to ask about a single semicolon. He did not laugh loudly, only smiled. But it was a real smile, and to me, that was worth more than all the forced laughter in Vesper. "Are you always like this?" I asked, after the quiet between us grew intimate enough to stand on its own. "Like what?" "Quiet. Listening more than speaking. It feels like you wait for people to reveal themselves before you give anything away." Nick looked down at his cup, turning it lightly in his hands. "Not always. But I learned early that silence is sometimes the safest invitation." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "And what else? Do you still believe in anything?" "I believe in moments that no one tries to control." Nick lifted his eyes, and the way he looked at me made it clear that the moment he meant was this one. "Like the fact that we are sitting here, in a small room, drinking tea, and you have not asked me to leave. Maybe because I have not decided yet," I said, half honest, half evasive. "Or maybe—" Nick tilted his head slightly. "You already decided, and you simply do not want to say it out loud." Silence settled again, but this time it was not heavy. I leaned back against the sofa cushion, my shoulders no longer tight. Nick did not move closer, did not reach for me, did not search for a chance to close the distance. And that made me feel even less guarded. What frightened me about him was not the speed at which he could get close, but the dangerous calm he brought with him, the way he made peace feel like a temptation. "Have you ever had a quiet night like this?" I asked. Nick looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the messy bookshelf, the unwashed coffee mug, and the thin blanket draped over the sofa arm. "No. But I know that if I ever did, it would look like this." I said nothing more. My body softened little by little with each sip of tea, and by the time I realized my head had rested against his shoulder, he had already been sitting still for a long while, not asking, not shifting, simply there. A silent anchor between 2 strangers on a night when nothing happened, and yet everything began. No promises, no assurances, only presence. And perhaps, sometimes, that is all we need to start believing in something new. 3 days after that quiet night, when I received a message from Nick with only 3 words, "Tonight, yes?" I did not hesitate. Not because I was ready, but because I knew that if I kept avoiding him, I would never understand the man slowly opening a door that was at once alluring and dangerous. The familiar car picked me up close to 7, and this time the driver did not ask my name. They knew who I was, and that sent a faint shiver through me, though strangely, it carried a sense of unexpected familiarity. As the car turned onto the private road leading to a high-rise building in the northern part of the city, I realized I was about to step into a part of Nick's world he had never mentioned. The lobby attendant bowed as we passed, no questions asked. A private elevator took me to the top floor without needing a keycard. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a wide space, bathed in soft golden light, quiet and so elegantly restrained that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Nick Romano's penthouse. Dark hardwood floors stretched ahead, guiding me into a spacious living room with high ceilings and a full wall of glass overlooking the glittering city below. Large, abstract paintings hung on the walls, their colors bold yet full of hidden meanings. The furniture was modern but not cold, every piece chosen with a precision so intentional I could sense the owner's personality in every line and shape. No ostentation, only power wrapped in silence. "Do you want to take a look around?" Nick asked as I stood frozen in the living room, his gaze waiting for my reaction. I nodded, and he let me go first without leading, without explaining, as if this was a test, or a true invitation. The kitchen was wide, white marble counters paired with dark wood cabinets, everything immaculate as if no one had ever touched it except for a few glass cups placed neatly by the sink. A short hallway led to an office, and I stopped there longer than I meant to. Bookshelves reached the ceiling, filled with old leather-bound volumes and neatly arranged files. On the desk sat a fountain pen, and a watch placed squarely in the center, as if it were the only item that mattered. No family photos, nothing personal. Yet something about the room told me he spent more time here than anywhere else. I continued exploring, and when I opened the last door on the left, I stepped into a room unlike anything I had ever seen. His bedroom. Wide, dark, and quiet like a confession. Walls painted charcoal gray, jet black sheets, only a single lamp resting beside the bed. The only photograph in the entire penthouse sat on a small shelf by the window, a young woman smiling brilliantly in a field of sunlit grass. I did not need to ask who she was. Leanna, the woman who had once been his entire world. I turned and saw him leaning against the doorway, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. "Can I ask you something?" I said after a still moment. He nodded. "Why me?" He did not answer immediately. The silence stretched long enough that I almost regretted asking. Then he stepped inside, came close, and stopped directly in front of me. "Because you are unlike anyone who has ever walked into this place," he said quietly, "and you are the first I have let in without hiding anything. Even if what you show might scare me, I know what frightens you. And still, you stayed. That is why I want you here longer than one night." I looked into his eyes and found no promises, only a stark honesty, no embellishment, no deception. And for the first time, I understood that Nick's world was not built on grandeur. It was built on loss, on the pieces no one else dared to face. And he had opened it wide for me to see. Not because he believed I was strong enough, but because he hoped I would not run. And I did not know why, but I did not want to run at all. The next morning I woke in the unusually quiet penthouse, sunlight filtering through the thick curtains and laying soft golden streaks across the dark gray sheets. Nick was no longer beside me, but the pillow next to mine was still warm. I heard the faint clink of dishes from the kitchen, followed by a small, bright laugh so unexpected it made me stop in my tracks. A woman's voice. I slipped on Nick's loose shirt, tied my hair back, and stepped out of the bedroom, my bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. Nick stood by the kitchen counter, holding a cup of coffee, and on the tall stool beside him was a young woman with soft brown curls and a smile as warm as early summer light. She looked nothing like anyone I had imagined in Nick's cold, sharp world, yet the look they exchanged told me there was a bond there, unmistakable and unbroken. "Claire," Nick said when he saw me, his voice gentle and natural, as if I had always belonged in this home. "This is Isabella, my sister." Isabella turned toward me immediately, stood, and extended her hand with an easy, warm grin. "I have heard Nick mention you," she said, her voice carrying a faint Italian lilt, graceful, quick, and unmistakably lively. "I honestly did not think you were real." I shook her hand, a little embarrassed, but laughing at the way she said it. "I hope what you heard was not too frightening." Isabella tilted her head. "If it came from him, it is usually one of two things: extremely concerning or extremely inaccurate." Nick raised an eyebrow and set his cup down, though he did not dispute it. I sat beside Isabella, accepted the cup Nick handed me, and the atmosphere among the three of us felt lighter than I ever would have expected. Isabella told me she was in her final year studying psychology in New York, but she often came back to Boston on weekends. I still love my old apartment, but whenever I come home I have to have breakfast with Nick, she said with a wink, partly because I miss him, and partly to make sure he is still alive. I laughed. Nick only shook his head, folding his arms and watching us like he was observing a gentle play unfolding. When Nick stepped away to take a phone call, Isabella turned to me, her expression softening, her eyes losing their playful spark and settling into something quietly serious. "You know he is not someone who opens up easily," she said softly. "But I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you this morning." I said nothing, surprised by how perceptive she was. Isabella continued, "Nick does not trust easily. Even with me, there are things he never shares. But you make him calm in a way I have never seen in any woman who has ever been in this home." I did not know how to respond. Part of me warmed at her words. Another part reminded me that my place here came with weight expectation, and with truths I might not yet understand. "Were you ever afraid?" I asked quietly. "Growing up with someone like him," Isabella nodded without hesitation. "Yes, especially when I was younger. I heard stories, saw the way people looked at my brother, and wondered if I was living in the same reality as everyone else. But then I learned that the world is not divided into good and bad. Some people do bad things for good reasons, and some people survive only by becoming something others fear." I was struck silent by the simplicity and honesty in her words. Isabella was not defending her brother, she was telling the truth, and that made me trust her more than any explanation she could have offered. When Nick returned, Isabella stood and grabbed her bag. "I have to go. I have a class this afternoon. But next time we meet, I want you to tell me about your childhood. I bet it is 10 times more interesting than my brother's." She hugged me quickly, then hugged Nick a bit longer, whispering something that made him smile. When the door closed behind her, the penthouse fell back into its familiar quiet. But for me, a new door had opened. Not into Nick's world, into the man himself, seen through the eyes of the one person who had watched him break and still stayed. That afternoon, a light rain settled over Boston, the drops sliding down the large glass windows of the penthouse living room as if trying to veil the entire city below. I sat on the long chaise by the window, holding a warm cup of tea in my hands, while Nick stood quietly by the fireplace, shoulders slightly, curved as though carrying an invisible weight. The air between us had grown heavier after meeting Isabella, not because anything was wrong, but because I could feel a door slowly opening, revealing the fragments he had kept hidden for so many years. "That photograph," I said, not exactly asking, but not avoiding either. "She was Liana, wasn't she?" Nick did not turn, but I saw his fingers tighten around the whiskey glass. He nodded, barely. "She was my fiancé, the only person who ever saw Nick Romano without the name Nick Romano." I did not know what made him choose this moment to share it. Perhaps Isabella, perhaps the simple fact that I was still here after everything. Or maybe he understood that without this truth, the two of us would always stand on opposite edges of an emotional cliff. "I met her at a city charity gala," he began, his voice low but steady. "She was unlike anyone in that room. No pretending, no angles. Liana was the kind of person who could make the whole world slow down with a single smile." I stayed silent, letting him speak, knowing that if I interrupted, he might stop altogether. We fell in love so fast it scared me. But she wasn't scared. She pulled me out of everything I believed was my nature. We had planned to leave all of this behind, move to a small town, and start over. She taught me to believe in ordinary things like eating dinner on time, taking walks in the park, and calling my mother once a week. A small smile crossed his lips, gone almost as soon as it appeared. 3 months before the wedding, she was killed. A simple traffic collision, that's what the papers said. But I knew it wasn't an accident. My chest tightened, my fingers cold around the warm cup. Nick continued, his voice slower now, as if each word carried weight. "The crash happened exactly 1 week after I refused to sign a deal with the Volkovs. I had no proof, no camera footage, no surviving witnesses, not even the taxi driver, who died on impact. Just instinct, and a few traces that conveniently vanished. And since then, I didn't need to finish the sentence." He nodded. I went back, stopped trying to get out. I used everything I had to make sure it would never happen to anyone else I cared for again. I set my cup down and walked toward him. "But you are doing it again," I said softly, my eyes locked on his. "You are letting me in. What does that mean?" Nick lifted his gaze. In his eyes was grief that had never fully faded, but also something else, something newer, more fragile. "It means I am risking it again, because for the first time in years, I am more afraid of losing someone I have not even had the chance to keep." I stepped closer, placing my hand over the one holding the glass. The cold of the glass slowly warmed beneath our touch. I did not know whether anything about this was right or wrong. All I knew was that in this quiet room, with the rain falling beyond the windows and his unspoken pain meeting all the things I could not yet say, I did not want to turn away. And he, despite being haunted by the death of the woman he once loved, was slowly learning how not to lose the woman standing before him now. That night, after Nick left to deal with an unexpected meeting, I stayed alone in the penthouse that was supposed to be nothing more than a temporary refuge. I sat at the desk in the guest bedroom, the laptop open in front of me with an unfinished draft for a client. The cursor blinked on the title line, but my mind could not cling to a single sentence. I felt myself drifting between two realities, one of my familiar old days filled with weak coffee, tight deadlines, and evenings curled under a blanket in my small apartment, and another that was strange, uncertain, threaded with danger, yet pulsing with a sense of living more fully, feeling more honestly, seeing something real in the eyes of a man I still could not decipher. All day I had been thinking about Liana, about the small photograph on the shelf, about the look in Nick's eyes when he spoke her name. I was not jealous, I could not be. How do you envy a memory that has turned into a wound someone has carried for years? And yet because of that, I could not ignore the weight of what it meant for me to be here, and for him to choose me when he could have chosen anything else. I began asking myself the question I had always avoided. What did I truly want from this relationship? Was this nothing more than a reckless thrill? Or was it something deeper, something I had been pretending not to recognize? I looked around the room where I was staying, noticing how every detail reflected Nick's quiet attentiveness, not flashy, but deliberate. The pillow supported my back at exactly the right angle. The bookshelf included the genres I liked, and in the kitchen cabinet were the exact teas I usually brewed. He let me stay, but he never made demands. He did not try to change me. He simply opened a door and waited for me to decide whether to step through. And now I found myself wondering, if I stayed not for a night, not for a week, but truly stayed, what would happen? I pictured waking up in the morning with sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I imagined late breakfasts, small arguments over Netflix shows, nights when he came home late while I lay reading in one of his shirts. Ordinary things, small and unremarkable, but in Nick's world, the most ordinary things were the most extraordinary. I had not told him any of this, and I was not sure I was ready to. But for the first time in my life, the idea of staying came not from a fear of loneliness or the momentum of a moment, but from a conscious desire to choose it. I wanted to know if a different story could exist for someone like me and someone like him, in a world where right and wrong had never been clear, but emotion remained so real it was impossible to turn away. And as night fell outside, the glass window, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I had stepped further into Nick's life than I ever intended, and for the first time, I had no desire to go back. Dinner had been set for Saturday evening at an upscale Italian restaurant tucked quietly along the edge of Beacon Hill, where soft golden light glowed against old brick walls, making the entire place feel as though it had existed there since another century. Nick said very little as he walked me inside, but his hand around mine tightened just enough along the way to remind me silently, deliberately, that no matter what happened, he was with me. As we stepped in, a man in a gray suit was already waiting. His eyes were cold and hard as steel, his face carved into an expression that revealed nothing. He didn't need an introduction. I knew instantly this was Dmitry Volkov, the head of the Volkov family, the same name woven through the threat I had received the day before. Beside him stood a woman in a black velvet dress, her hair pinned high, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on me with unmistakable appraisal. Elena Volkov. She looked younger than I had imagined, but her eyes were far too old to belong to someone unseasoned. Inside the private dining room set at the back of the restaurant, the air grew heavy the moment we took our seats. No one smiled. No one bothered with small talk about the food or the weather. only the quiet clink of cutlery and the weight of glances traded like moves on a chessboard. "Claire, isn't it?" Dmitri spoke first, his voice a deep, muted blend of English and Russian, as if spoken through a fog. "I have heard much about you." I lifted my eyes to meet his, keeping my tone steady. "I hope some of it was good." He smiled, though not warmly, more the smile of a man accustomed to deciding the outcome of every encounter. In our world, good or bad is simply a matter of perspective. I felt Nick's fingers tighten around mine beneath the table, a silent warning. Elena sipped her wine and tilted her head, studying me. "You know who Nick is, and you stayed. That intrigues me." "Intrigues you, or displeases you?" I asked, unable to completely mask the tension in my voice. Elena smiled, a real smile this time, yet layered with meaning. "Perhaps both." Dmitri set his glass down and leaned toward Nick. "I do not mind that you have a girlfriend. What I mind is that you are bringing an outsider into circles never meant for them." "Claire is not an outsider," Nick said, his voice low and sharp, slicing through the thick air. "She knows where she stands and chose to stay. That deserves respect." Dmitri did not blink, though a vein at his temple tightened. "Respect is not the problem. Inconvenience is. Personal matters, emotions, those are luxuries in our world. You know that." "I used to think so," Nick replied, meeting his gaze without wavering. "Until I realized the real danger is not letting someone in, but living an entire life without allowing anyone close." Elena leaned forward slightly, her voice colder now. "And if that choice gets her hurt? Or killed?" I tightened my grip on Nick's hand but did not pull away. "I am not here because I am naive," I said. "I am here because I know exactly who he is. And because I believe there are things worth more than safety." The room seemed to freeze for a moment. No one spoke. Even the servers poured wine in absolute silence, sensing the voltage gathering in the air. At last, Dmitri leaned back, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Very well, but remember this. Once you step onto a board, no one gets to stand off to the side for long. And wrong moves are always paid for with something people never expect to lose." Nick lifted an eyebrow, his tone calm in a way that was almost unsettling. "We did not come to play your game. We came to show you that not everyone is moved like a piece." As we left the table and walked down the long hallway toward the exit, I could feel the eyes on our backs, a presence that did not fade even as the door closed behind us. But one thing had become unmistakably clear. I was no longer a spectator standing at the edges, and Nick Romano, within this world of threats and power, had just placed me somewhere that would force the entire board to shift. When the restaurant door closed behind us, I finally realized I had been holding my breath for half the night. The Boston evening wind slipped through my thin coat, though it was not the cold that made me shiver, but the echo of Dimitri's final words still lingering in my mind. Wrong moves are always paid for with something people never expect to lose. I looked at Nick. His gaze was taut like a pulled wire, his jaw clenched, and he said nothing. We drove back in silence, but I could feel something fierce stirring inside him, not anger, but a quiet, sharpened resolve, waiting for the right moment. When the car stopped beneath the building, Nick didn't step out immediately. He turned toward me, his hand closing around mine more tightly than usual, his voice low and rough yet steady. "They will try. Soon. Maybe not directly, but they will try to shake you, scare you, make you doubt me." I tightened my grip, answering with a steadiness I hadn't expected from myself. "I know, but they have no idea how far I have come to be here. And I do not crumble over a tense dinner." Nick looked at me for a heartbeat longer, then nodded, as if that confirmation was the signal he needed to step into the next stage of a chess match he no longer intended to play in the shadows. 3 days later, it began. An anonymous email reached my work inbox with a grainy photo of Nick standing beside an unfamiliar brunette woman, taken from a distance, with a single line beneath it. "He has made the same promises before." I didn't panic. I didn't question Nick. I simply deleted the email, then forwarded it into a private archive. That night, I received a bassa call from an unknown number, a woman's voice speaking in an even, measured tone. "If you know what is good for you, you will leave before things become unpleasant." I didn't answer her, but this time, I recorded it. When I told Nick everything, he remained silent for a long time, not because he was surprised, but because the emotion simmering in his eyes was anger of the kind that makes no sound. In that moment I understood something. Protection doesn't always mean shielding someone from the truth. Sometimes it means confronting the danger so directly that no one dares come close again. A week later, at a private gathering restricted to high-ranking members of the financial elite and powerful families, Nick brought me with him. It was the first time. And the first time he appeared at my side as an undeniable declaration. The moment we stepped in, every gaze in the room snapped toward us. Dmitri and Elena stood at the far end, surrounded by a group of people I had never seen before, their eyes like cold silhouettes drifting through a bad dream. One of them, a man in a white suit, lifted his glass toward me with a smile far too knowing. Then he turned to Nick, raising his voice just enough for his circle to hear. "This new girl is interesting. But are you sure, Nick? In our world, interesting usually comes with risk." Nick did not slow. He did not shift expression. He stopped directly before them, his eyes cold as steel, and when he spoke, each word was sharp enough to cut the air. "She is mine, and anyone who touches her by word, by glance, or by intention will pay for it, not because she is weak, but because I will not let her fight alone." The atmosphere froze for a breath that felt like an eternity. Then a dry laugh sounded from somewhere behind us, but no one said another word. Nick tightened his hold on my hand, then leaned slightly toward me, whispering so quietly I barely heard it. "Do not fear them. Fear is what they use to control. But you are no longer someone on the outside. You are the reason I cannot return to who I was, and they know it." In the cold press of that crowd, his hand in mine was the only place still carrying warmth. And for the first time, I understood that his declaration was not a claim of possession. It was a vow. And somehow, I had become the center not only of his heart, but of a power struggle everyone believed only men like him were capable of playing. But perhaps they had forgotten one truth. Sometimes, an ordinary woman is the piece no one sees coming. After that night's gathering, when all the eyes had finally slipped out of sight and the whispers dissolved into the Boston darkness, I thought I would feel steadier. That Nick standing up before all those powerful people, claiming his protection over me, would wash away every lingering doubt. But somehow, inside me rose something entirely different. Not unease about him, but about myself. I stood on the penthouse balcony, looking down at the city shimmering with lights, yet inside my chest everything felt fogged, as if a mist had thickened and refused to clear. Behind me, Nick was making tea the way he always did, the kind I liked best. He was still himself with all his quiet gestures, still the calm presence that had grown familiar between us. Yet everything in me was turning like a whirlpool with no place to settle. I loved him. That was no longer a question. I loved the way he looked at me as if the world held no one else. I loved the way he listened when I talked about small things, unfinished drafts, clients who emailed at impossible hours, the time my cat Oliver spilled coffee over my keyboard. I loved his fierceness, the way he would stand against anyone, whether it was Dmitri Volkov or ghosts from his own past. But that love was exactly what frightened me. I was afraid because what I felt was growing too fast, too fiercely, as though I were being swept into something far beyond my control. I feared the people from his world, the ones who did not have to raise their voices to quiet an entire room, the ones who could end a life with a single phone call. I feared Elena's cold, incisive gaze, as if she had already read every thought inside my head with one glance. I feared that someday Nick would be forced to leave, not because he wanted to, but because his world demanded it, and I would once again be left alone holding pieces of memories no one else would believe were real. I walked back into the living room and sat on the sofa, waiting for Nick to bring the tea. He handed me the cup, then sat beside me, studying me quietly. He always sensed when my silence wasn't exhaustion, but a storm gathering inside. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice gentle as wind brushing over water. "I'm thinking about loving someone like you," I answered, then paused, as if the words themselves had touched the deepest part of me. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to go all the way with you, Nick. Sometimes it feels like I'm standing between two cliffs, and one gust of wind will send me falling." Nick didn't react right away. He simply looked at me, and in his eyes there was no anger, no disappointment, only a depth of understanding so complete it made me want to cry. "Do you know I used to think the same thing?" he said quietly. "That loving someone ordinary, someone who didn't carry my shadows, would be the cruelest thing I could do to them. But then I realized something. The crueler thing is not giving them the chance to choose. You're choosing, every day, and I know that isn't easy. I let my head fall onto his shoulder, tears spilling before I could stop them. He didn't wipe them away. He simply let me cry, as if he understood that these tears were necessary, not because I was weak, but because this was how I swept fear out of my heart. When I finally lifted my head, my eyes still damp, Nick pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, a kiss as light as a promise. You don't have to be strong alone, Claire. We'll walk through each day, not because the world allows it, but because we choose to stay. I nodded, saying nothing, because in that moment, I understood something. Love and fear are not opposite forces. Sometimes they live in the same heart. And what makes us brave is not the moment we stop being afraid, but the moment we continue to love even while the fear remains. That night, after all the words spoken and all the ones that never found their way out, we let go of every last layer of defense. There was no longer any distance between a man whose past was steeped in shadows and a woman still learning how to stand steady in a world that would never truly be hers. There were only two people, in a quiet room, suspended in a fragile space, where the rawest emotions were allowed to exist without fear of being broken. Nick led me to the bedroom with a light yet certain hold on my hand, as if he feared that loosening his grip would make everything we had built slip away. No words passed between us, but his eyes, his touch, his breath, each one moved in rhythm with mine. The soft light in the room fell across the wooden floor, casting our shadows like two parallel lines that had finally found their point of convergence. He brushed his fingers across my cheek, the tender stroke like a silent question. I looked up at him and found no rush, no demand, only a yearning to be trusted, to be close, to love without hiding. When his lips met mine, there was nothing forceful or hungry. It was a deliberate surrender, a quiet affirmation that this was a moment we were choosing not to feel loneliness, but to connect in a way words could never shape. Nick's hand slid to my neck, then to my collarbone, his touch slow, reverent, as though he were reading an unfamiliar map with a kind of devotion. Every touch was a bridge, every kiss another heartbeat echoing against mine. I trembled not from fear but from a rising tide of anticipation. In his arms, I was no longer someone standing on the edge between choice and uncertainty. I was the woman he looked at as if there were no one else. The woman he breathed with, trembled with, dissolved into in that single shared moment. He unbuttoned his shirt one clasp at a time, unhurried, and when the fabric slipped from his shoulders, I saw the faint scars remnants of a past he had never fully spoken aloud. I reached out, my palm resting against his warm skin, and he closed his eyes, as if that touch soothed something deeper than pain. As he bent over me, his hands traced a slow path from my waist down, every motion like a melody woven not from notes but from emotion. Our clothes fell to the floor, softly, the way the world outside slipped away. No judging eyes remained, no weight of the past, no fear of whatever waited beyond tomorrow. There was only the present, only the quickened breath of two people who had found, in each other, the single safe place they could create. When he lifted me onto the bed, my body met his without hesitation, each movement becoming an unspoken whisper. I trust you. I am here. I am not running anymore. He slid his hand along my back, pulling me closer, as if even the smallest space between us was too much. The kisses deepened, the touches grew bolder, and I felt myself melt beneath every stroke of his hand. I was not merely a woman loving a dangerous man. I was the only woman he allowed to see him vulnerable. When everything quieted, we lay beside each other, my arm resting across his chest, my head tucked into the curve of his shoulder where his heartbeat thudded steady like a lullaby in the dark. Nick pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead and whispered something I had longed for but never dared expect. He told me he loved me not with infatuation, but with the choice of a man who had known loss and understood the worth of finding something he never thought he could hope for again. I closed my eyes and let my body soften completely into his embrace, because I knew that no matter how the world might shift tomorrow, no matter what shadows still lurked in his past or danger hovered over us, tonight belonged to us. Tonight, in the space between trust and longing, I gave myself to Nick Romano not only with my body, but with a heart I had never surrendered to anyone before. Boston in late March was still cold, but the wind on the rooftop of Nick's building carried something different. It wasn't the usual chill drifting in from the Charles River, but a clear, quiet kind of air, as though the whole city were holding its breath, watching something about to unfold. I stood close to the railing, hands wrapped around the warm cup of tea Nick had made and placed into my palms, before disappearing inside with a vague explanation that he needed to prepare something. I didn't ask. Over the past week, since the night we became each other's, I had learned that with Nick Romano, everything happened for a reason, and most of those reasons were meant to protect or cherish what mattered to him. I turned when I heard soft footsteps behind me. Nick stepped out with 2 glasses of champagne, but what truly caught me was his expression. Gone was the dangerous glint I had seen the first night we met at Vesper. Gone was the cold distance of a man accustomed to power and solitude. His eyes were softer now, deeper, and something in them looked almost nervous. He handed me a glass and stood beside me in silence. 2 people, 2 glasses of champagne, and a night sky full of stars that felt lit just for us. After a few comfortable minutes, Nick set his glass on the ledge and turned fully toward me. "Claire," he began, his voice low with a tremor I rarely heard. "There are things in my life I thought I would never have again. Trust, peace, the feeling of touching someone without fearing they would disappear. Then you came, with a literal slap across the face, and you brought everything I didn't dare hope for." I let out a soft laugh, my heart racing wildly as he slipped a hand into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. When he knelt, time simply stopped. No more street noise, no more wind pressing against my ears, only my heartbeat pounding like a drum announcing what was coming. "I cannot promise to keep you absolutely safe, because the world I live in does not allow that. But I can promise to stand between you and whatever danger comes. I can promise to be the place you return to, no matter what happens. So, Claire Bennett, will you do the most unsafe thing in the world with me? Will you marry me?" I looked at him, the most powerful man in any room he entered now, kneeling under the night sky, eyes locked on mine as if afraid to miss even the smallest flicker of emotion. I wasn't afraid. Not because the danger had vanished, but because I knew I would not face any of it alone. I set my champagne glass down and knelt in front of him, touching his cheek as if to confirm the moment was real. "I don't know what lies ahead, Nick, but I know that if I don't choose this, I will always wonder what would have happened if I had been a little braver. And now I am brave enough. I say yes." Nick exhaled, his whole body loosening as though freed from an invisible weight. He slid the ring onto my finger, a simple platinum band, unflashy but solid, fitting so perfectly it felt as if it had been made for me from the beginning. When he pulled me into his arms, I heard his heartbeat clearly, steady and strong like the promise he had just given. Behind us, the city lights flickered on and off, but to me the world had narrowed to the warmth of the man holding me so tightly. A proposal far from fairy tale perfect, yet the truest one for a love like ours. A love chosen, guarded, and daring enough to cross every unsafe boundary simply to remain together. I once thought I would spend my whole life inside the small safe zone I had built for myself, a laptop, a stubborn cat named Oliver, and half-finished drafts I never felt confident enough to send out. I once believed that men like Nick Romano only existed in movies, or on the pages of fiction men, who carried darkness, power, and secrets that women like me were better off avoiding. But when I said yes, on that rooftop, beneath the Boston night, and the unwavering look in Nick's eyes, I knew I had stepped into a world nothing like the one I had known. A world full of danger, whispers from the shadows, cold handshakes, and nightmares that outsiders could only imagine. Yet at the same time, I stepped into a kind of love unlike anything I had ever experienced. A love that made me feel seen, chosen, protected, and loved with all the pieces of myself I once believed I had to hide. Nick didn't change his world to make room for me. He opened a door, gave me the right to choose, and waited patiently until I was ready to step through. I learned that real love isn't the bouquet of roses on special occasions or sweet words spoken when life is easy. Real love is when you see the fear in someone's eyes and still choose to stay. It is knowing they carry a heavy past, yet still feeling strong enough to hold their hand and keep walking. It is accepting the risk not out of blindness, but because you believe what exists between you is worth whatever it may cost. I don't know what waits ahead for me and Nick in the years to come. There may be more tense dinners, more threats wrapped inside congratulations, more late-night phone calls. But there will also be mornings when he makes tea for me, moments on the balcony watching the sunrise, and times when he whispers my name, the one only he uses with a look that makes the rest of the world irrelevant. I chose to love Nick Romano. I chose to stay. And in doing so, I also chose to believe in myself, in the strength of the heart, and in the healing power of a love that is imperfect but true. My story may have begun with a slap and a strange encounter in a nightclub, but what makes it unforgettable is the journey of two lost souls who found one another and dared to cross the boundary between fear and faith to build something real together. If you have stayed with us until now, I want to ask you something. How does this story make you feel? Have you ever found yourself standing between safety and courage? Have you ever loved someone whose world was anything but easy? Share your feelings below. We truly want to hear from you, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. And if this story touched something deep within you, please subscribe, like, and share this video so it can reach even more people. We will continue bringing you heartfelt, honest stories that might stay with you long after the video ends. Thank you for giving us your precious time. We hope each video will be more than just a story. It will be a bridge of emotion, connection, and understanding. Wishing you health, calm, and the strength to find peace in this unpredictable world. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.